Hello, I'm Elizabeth, one of the librarians at the Shelby Township Library, and today I wanted to share with you one of the great resources that the library has even when we're closed, and that is a library subscription to Ancestry.com. Now, usually the Ancestry.com library subscription is only available to people who actually visit our library. But since right now, due to the pandemic, we're not able to have people in the building, Ancestry and the library have teamed, and you can access Ancestry.com from your home for a limited time. At this time, Ancestry has made this available through September 30th of 2020. They have already extended that a couple of times though, so that might be an ongoing thing. We will keep people posted and put updates whenever we know more. But for now, I thought I would give a quick tutorial and overview of some of the different things that you can find in Ancestry.com to unlock the puzzle pieces of your family history. Before we get fully started using Ancestry.com, I wanted to mention that this is only one of the many resources that the library has or that are available to people who are studying their family history. The library has books on ways to look in other places. We have subscriptions to magazines like Genealogy Today, and there are other databases like a database of Michigan history and things like that that you can explore through the library to find different pieces and bits of your family tree. But let's get started with Ancestry.com. In order to get to it, you're going to first go to the Shelby Township Library homepage. That's at shelbytwplib.org. Once you get there, you're going to search along the top bar where it says Search the Catalog. And once we get to the catalog, we're going to log in. In order to log in, you do need to have your Shelby Township Library card number and your PIN. If you don't have your Shelby Township Library card number, or if you live in Shelby Township but don't have a card, or you just don't know your PIN, you can contact the library at 586-739-7414 during our business hours, and we will help you get started. So when you log in, you're going to type in your library card number. And your PIN. And once you are logged in, your name will appear at the top. Over on the left-hand side, this box will have just opened up a new item on the menu. It will have added Ancestry Remote Access. That is going to be how we're going to get to Ancestry.com. So we're going to click right there where it says Ancestry Remote Access. And here we are. So, as you look at this first page, you can see that there's a lot of different information. Down below, there are things like quick links to public member trees. Those are trees that people who have personal subscriptions to Ancestry.com have made. One thing I wanted to mention about Ancestry.com, the library subscription, is that it is a little bit different than a personal subscription. So if you've ever experimented or played around with one of those, there will be a lot of the same information. But our subscription has international information, which makes it maybe more complex than the basic personal subscription. However, it does lack the ability to save individual items right in your Ancestry account. You can still save things to your home computer, you can print them out, you can download them to a flash drive. So there's a lot of ways to save the information that you've found. It is just a little bit different than a personal one. So if you're looking for specific information in your family, you can do one of these quick links. So if you're looking for immigration information, birth and marriage records, but if you're just kind of starting to explore and you want to know what can I find out, you can do a general search. And so we're just going to click here on all categories to show a general search. One thing I encourage you to do as you're starting is to think about what you already know. Your family history in many ways is like a giant jigsaw puzzle with lots and lots of pieces. Some of the pieces you already have, and some of the pieces you're looking for. And Ancestry.com has millions of pieces, and some of them fit your puzzle, and most of them don't. And so you're trying to find the right pieces. The best way is to think about those perfect pieces you already know. Maybe you know a relative or ancestor's name, birth date, death date, when they were married, where they lived. All that information helps to find them more specifically. but sometimes you only know a little bit. So we're going to start looking for a relative of mine whose name was John Robert Campion. And all I really know about him is that he lived in Michigan. And you can see here that it'll show you a lot of different places. You want to make sure you're clicking on the right place, so Michigan, United States, and that he was born in 1916. And then we're going to click on search. And what comes up is I see a draft card, I see a 1920 census, I see a death index, and then down below that I'm seeing something for a John D. Campion who lived in Jackson, Michigan, and I see a John B. Campion who lived in Grand Rapids. I'm pretty sure about that first initial, so I know I want to stick with the John R. Campion. And that's one of the things to think about. If you didn't know that middle name, you'd want to check all those records to make sure that you are getting to the right person. One of the things that we're going to start talking about now is the U.S. Census information. As I'm sure you know, the U.S. Census is part of the United States Constitution. It is required by law that the United States counts every person in the country every 10 years to find out where they're living, and that is used then to figure out things like voting districts and where federal funds go and all kinds of things. And the census questions have varied from decade to decade, and so it's kind of interesting to look at those different census lists. One thing I will say is that as we are doing our family tree and using census information to find out our family's history, if you haven't already done the 2020 census, I strongly encourage you to do that so that your descendants will be able to find out information for their own family trees. So going back, we're going to go back home so I can just show you here that there are census records from 1790 through 1940. While they have done censuses in 1950, 1960, those records are not available to the public. It is also required by law that those records be kept private or secret for 70 years. So the 1950 records should be released somewhere in the next year, somewhere in 2021. And they vary a lot. In the earliest censuses, 1790 and 1800, they asked only for the name of the man of the house. They asked for the number of children living in the house, the number of adults who lived in the house, and a number of people of color, or the number of slaves in the house. Obviously, so much has changed since then that the questions on the census have changed. And we're going to look at some examples. So we're going to go back to search. And this time we're going to look for census and voter lists. So we're going to do not a general search, but a narrow search. And we're going to type in the name Albert, whose middle initial was W, and his last name is Conaway, Conaway. And he was born in 1840 in Pennsylvania. So right here is as you can see, we've got the 1910 census, the 1900 census, 1920, all for this gentleman. So we're going to take a second here and look at just the 1900 census. When it comes up on Ancestry, most of the information on the census has been very nicely and helpfully typed out for you. This is great because sometimes reading handwriting from over 100 years ago can be a bit of a challenge. So it's nice to see this all put here for you. It lists his name, it lists where exactly he's living, it lists his wife's name and his occupation, things like that. But it is also helpful to view the census, which we can do right here. When you view a census, one thing that Ancestry.com does for us that's very helpful is it highlights the person that you are looking for. So even though, like I said, this handwriting is really tricky, if you see right here, you can see where it says Conaway, Albert W., and he's the head of the household. There's his wife, Flora, and his sons, Bertie and George. So that's very helpful right there to see. It also does, as you can see up at the top of this screen, it has typed out what the questions are, both so they're in there as a placeholder even if you move up and down, and so you can read what questions were being asked without having to scroll up to the top. And one of the things that the 1900 census asked, for example, that other censuses don't, but which can be helpful, is it asks women how many children they gave birth to and how many children they have living. This can be, especially for a time where childhood infancy death was high, you can find out some things about that. But you can also find out just some interesting pieces. For example, in this one we're looking at, Flora Conaway has said she gave birth to 0 children and that she has no children living. But down below it mentions that Albert Conaway has 2 sons. A couple of other things, if we look here, it says that Albert Conaway in 1900 was 59 years old and his wife Flora was 29 years old. So given that she was 30 years younger than him and he has other sons who were close to her age at 26 and 20, she's clearly a second wife. Or maybe third. We don't know that part until we do more investigating. But that's why it's kind of fun to look and find those pieces right here on the census. So that's one example. I'm going to go back, and when you're in Ancestry, if you've opened a document like a census, don't use the normal back button on your browser. Use the one that Ancestry gives you right here. It's pretty large and noticeable because that helps to keep the information and you go right back to the search you were doing. And so I just wanted to show you in 1920, just a small difference here. It asks just a couple of different questions that the 1900 census didn't ask. And that included, sorry, I'm going to go back. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to go now to the 1920 census. And that census asks some questions that the 1900 census didn't ask. So it just has a couple different things. It doesn't ask a woman about her children. But one thing it asks, given 1920 and the place that our country was in history, it asks if a person who's filing the census, did they immigrate from another country? And if so, what country? It asks what their native language is. And it also asks if they've become a naturalized citizen. In previous years or previous decades, once you immigrated to the United States, especially very early on, that was not considered as an important question, but later through our history that has become an important question. So it's now on the census. So we're going to go back and I'm just going to show, pause, all right. Okay, so now we're going to go back. I just wanted to mention a couple of other census questions. We're not going to look at examples at all of them, but in 1930, as the country was becoming more technological in many ways, one of the questions on the 1930 census was, do you own a radio? It also asked, were you a veteran? And this is, in 1930, this would have been just about 13 years past World War I. And so that was asking mostly about World War I veterans. In 1940, for example, when the Depression was just ending, but before the United States entry into World War II, it asked questions about, are you employed? How long have you been unemployed? And if you're working, are you working for a private company or for the government? And that was tracking partly how much federal programs that employed people, what they had been doing. That may not be necessarily part of the family history you're looking for, but a lot of it is interesting if you want a fuller picture, not just who lived, where they lived, who they married, when they died, but what kind of work were they doing and what was going on in their lives and their world at that time. So that's why there's a lot of interesting stuff on the census. The census only answers some questions, though. There's a lot of questions you may have that you can't find on the census. One of the key things on the census, like I mentioned in very early censuses, like 1790, 1800, women don't get names at all. It simply asks for the name of the head of the household, and then is there a wife, and maybe how old she is, maybe not, maybe just is she an adult, things like that. So we need to find some other ways to look for information. And there's a lot of other hidden secrets and different spots to puzzle out those little tidbits of information in Ancestry. Okay. So this time we're going to do a marriage search. So I'm going to put in that same example we started with before, John Robert Campion. And we know that he was born in 1916, and we know he's from Michigan. And we know that his spouse's name was Eva, and so we can put that in there. And now we are going to search. And so right up here, the first thing we have is Michigan marriage records. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. If you were doing this for your own family in the first time, you would click on that and see if it's the right person. You click on the next one and see if it's the right person. I've already moved us forward a little bit, and I know that's not the right John Robert Campion because that's his father. We're going to start with John Robert Campion Jr. here. And if we hadn't figured out before that he was a junior, now we know. And that he got married in Pennsylvania. And here he is, married to Viral Eva Conaway. And I am going to click on this, and this shows part of the application for their marriage. One thing on this, which I didn't point out before, is over here on the right-hand side are a lot of little tools that you can use. And if you see here, there's a plus and there's a minus, so if it's too big, you can click on that minus and make it a little bit smaller. And if it was too tiny to read, we could click on that plus and make it a little bigger. You can also just use the tool to move it around a little bit. So I'm just going to show you here that this is the application for the marriage license for getting married in Pennsylvania. And we have some information here that we might not have found elsewhere. So we know that his mother's name, because we knew he was John Robert Campion Jr., so we knew his dad's name, but we know his mom's name was Nellie and her maiden name was Smith. So that gives us some information. We also know that his father was born in Leeds, Yorkshire, England, and his mother was born in Gloucestershire. So that's some information that we might need as we're going back to look for the history of John Campion's parents. And that is useful in a lot of ways. Maiden names, finding women is one of the hardest things to get those maiden names, because if you don't have that, you don't know who the woman's parents were. So that's why we want to keep a lot of that. So I wanted to show you that one. Another thing is, on the census for John Robert Campion when he was married, it showed that his wife's name was Eva, which is why I put Eva in. But here I discover that Eva is really her middle name, that her first name was Viral. So I might want to do a new search for just her using the name Viral Eva Conaway or Viral Eva Campion, and that might lead me to some more official documents where she used her full name. It's also showing me that she has the same name as her mother, Viral Conaway, although a different middle name, and it shows her mother's maiden name is also on here. So now I can start to search Eva's family tree and that branch of the family tree in addition to John Campion's family tree. So on that marriage certificate, or the application for marriage license, we were able to find the maiden names of both the bride and the groom's mothers, which is a great tool. But sometimes those are not findable. One thing about Ancestry.com that I wanted to mention is that there are records that people have digitized and then given to Ancestry.com to use, which is a wonderful tool. But sometimes those records have not been digitized, and so they're not available in Ancestry.com. Another thing that happens is over the years, perhaps records, because of course they were all on paper, wherever they were being stored, there could have been a fire, there could have been a flood, and those records may no longer be available. So you want to have different tools in case you can't find any evidence of marriage records, but maybe you can find death certificates. So now we're going to look at a death certificate. So we're going to go ahead and put in someone who we already looked up once before as well. His name is Albert W. Conaway. And like I said before, he was born in 1841, and he was born in Pennsylvania. And we are going to just try a general search here and see if we can find him. And as I showed you before, we did the general search for birth, marriage, and death. Once you get into that search, you can narrow it down even more. So if you see over here on the left, there's birth, baptism, and christening records, there's marriage and divorce records, and then there are death records. We don't need to filter it down because you can see right here, right up on the top, Albert W. Conaway's death certificate popped up right on top. So we're going to go ahead and click on that one. And to help confirm that we have the right person, it shows that he's living in roughly the same place in Pennsylvania he was on that census we looked at, and his spouse's name is Flora Conaway, and he was married to Flora on that census. Now, of course, there are some really common names out there, and it might be the wrong person, but the right maiden or the right wife's name. In this case, Flora being a less common name, we've probably got the right person. So we're going to go ahead and click on View to see what else this tells us. And so up here, we've got his name. I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller, and then we'll just move it around. It shows that he was born in 1841. We get an exact date of his birth, which we did not have from the census, so that's kind of nice to know. It tells you that he was retired, the name of his father, and here is the name of his mother's maiden name. So if we had not found his marriage certificate, for example, we still get that maiden name there. And now we know we can look for Rhodey Carter, and that she was also from Pennsylvania. So that gives us some different things. Sometimes if you're trying to piece together family history, the other thing is a cause of death is always given on a death certificate. And sometimes if you're looking for maybe chronic illnesses within a family and trying to trace those back, that's another way to look. So that is one other thing there. And I am just gonna, so that's another thing to look at. A couple of other things we're gonna look at really quickly. One, I know we're hopping back and forth between the same people, but I just want to show a variety of different things, and these are good people for examples for certain things. So I'm going to put John Robert Campion back in here. And this time we're going to click on military records. So we put that in, and we're going to go ahead and put in his birth date again. And then he lived in Michigan. And we're going to click on this. And so here is his draft card, and this is for World War II. So as you can see, we do have a different birth date for him, so we may want to check into that, because here this is saying he was born on April 18th, 1914, but he is still married to Eva V. Campion. So as we discovered on our marriage application, it's actually Viral Eva, but she's using it that way, or he did when he filled this out. And if we view it the actual thing, it gives us a little bit more about his life, where he's living in Ferndale, and the fact that he works for Ford in Dearborn, and that he has listed his wife as next of kin. So that's just some little information there. It's not a lot of information, but if you are having trouble finding bits of information in other sources, this might be one. Like we talked about how the census is filled out, they try to count everybody, but not everybody always answers the census every 10 years. So a relative of yours might not be in the census. This is a way to find out some other information. And then we're going to go back here to edit search, and only because I'm going to change this birth date, instead of John Robert Campion Jr., we're going to take just a second here and look for his father, because I wanted to talk about immigration. Actually, that's going to be military records. We are going to go to search and start a new search. So we'll do a new search here. And we are going to put in John Robert Campion. And if you remember before, he lived in Michigan, but then we're going to click here on Show More Options, and we're going to put birth. And even though I don't know his birth year, we know that according to the marriage application, he was from Leeds in Yorkshire, England. So we're going to use that and see what we can find with that. And we'll click search. And now we are seeing some things. We see a Detroit border crossing and passenger crew from Leeds that came to Detroit in 1907. And we'll go ahead and just filter that. Sometimes if you do a search and you're getting more information than you need, like we've got that draft card again, we've got his own draft card. Over here you can click on immigration at that time, and that's going to narrow it down. So we have a Detroit border crossing. We have a U.S. border crossing from Canada to the United States. And then we have some other Campions who are not the Campions we're looking for. So let's just look at that first one. And it shows you right on here, and we'll look at the cards in a second, but it shows that, as we guessed, he came from Leeds, which is a city in Yorkshire, England. He arrived in 1907. He arrived from Canada, and that they asked for an arrival contact in the United States. So he had a friend in Detroit, and that his father's name was James. So when we go to search his family history further back, we know to now look for a James Campion. And the other thing on here is not only do we know that his father's name is James Campion, if we go in, and I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger, it shows his father's whole address, and sometimes that can be helpful to look for too. So that's a little information there about him as we are trying to look further back beyond John. And the other thing here is this U.S. border crossing, and that's just a manifest. But it tells you the name of the boat, the name of the ship, and where exactly he crossed. So different information there. And these are just a few of the pieces that you can use to look at your family history. We hope to do more of these and do deep dives into things like just military family history and maybe just immigration, things like that. But for today, we're going to stop, but I hope this was helpful to you.